Hello, listeners. This is Lisette Alvarez with Tales from the Hearth and Interview with a Storyteller. The storyteller that we have this evening, which is evening at least for me, but what is it? 5 o'clock somewhere. That's the phrase. It's 5 o'clock somewhere. I am joined with M. Mulder, who is the creator of The Moon Crown, which is a horror podcast that really defies explanation. It is really beautifully sound designed, and I am just starting to get into it. I highly recommend you, if you like horror and interesting sound design with your horror, that you go check it out. But I'll also let introduce their work as a creator and as a storyteller. In your own words, what is the type of storytelling that you do?
I think I do write a lot of horror, and it's not like I went out of my way to kind of be like, oh, I'm going to be a horror writer. It's just kind of like I'll start with sort of a vague concept of, oh, I'd like to do a fantasy story, or I'd like to do something sci-fi, cyberpunk, and then it kind of always drifts towards psychological horror. So that's something that I can tap into pretty easily. It's especially because I kind of have these specific themes of writing that sort of go through everything I write. So
yeah, no, and that's one of the things I really enjoy hearing from people is, what are those themes? You know, what are the types of tropes? Because on the one hand, I want to say M's really, really big now, but I saw those themes that M was working on from the very beginning, and we talked about it, and I want to have that kind of experience once you get big, right? No, and yes, absolutely. All right. Well, the first thing that and you mentioned that you listened to the other interviews, so you kind of know what's coming, and it's a bit of a challenge, a bit of a storyteller challenge, but I think you got this. And again, this is meant to just be an exercise in, we are all storytelling animals. Even if you weren't a storyteller, you would have a story to tell. I believe that. So I will do is I'm going to set a timer for 30 seconds. And if you want to just think or jot down what kind of story you want to tell, I'm going to ask you to tell a story in 5 minutes. It can be any kind of story. It could be fiction. It could be semi-autobiographical. It could be a comedy sketch. I don't care. Just tell us a story in 5 minutes.
So when I was a kid, I would see stuff when I was falling asleep. And I remember the first kind of sort of ghostly figure that I saw. And it was just a hand on a doorknob. And that freaked me out a lot, as it should. Like, as I was growing up, I would kind of see more and more of these things. And there was a particular one that really freaked me out. So for a while, I slept on a bunk bed. I was a full-grown adult, so that's that's its own thing. But I had a bunk bed, like, in my 20s. And one night, I woke up, and there was a little boy standing at the edge of the bed. I was super confused. He was kind of dressed like in 1920s clothes. It was very strange, like a little paper boy. And normally when I would see these things, I'm kind of strange in that I will roll over and kind of stare at the wall instead. Like, I'll know that I feel like I've seen something in the room. But instead of kind of having a flight or fight response, I'm sort of the fawn sort of subtype. So I just kind of turn away when I'm scared of something in the dark. It's not going to help me. There's going to be one day where this is not a great thing to do. But this time, I actually saw him walk out of the room. And so I got out of bed and followed him. As I was going out into the hallway, my friend's friend was coming out of her bedroom. She was sleeping the night. And she just stopped in the hallway while I was in the hallway, and we just looked at each other, and I asked her if she was okay. She didn't say anything. She just went into the bathroom, and then I was like, okay, this is too weird for me. So I went back, went to sleep, and ever since then, I've kind of had more and more kind of frightening, unusual experiences, and every once in a while, I'll see something that will be kind of like spiders, swarms in the corner of the room on the ceiling, or there was one time where I saw like 2 shadow figures, and one was very tall, kind of Slender Man-ish, and the other one was kind of normal, and these were shadowy creatures. So this freaked me out for a while. And then there was one day I sort of had this strange feeling about it where this happened so frequently. I was like, okay, maybe ghosts, like maybe something like this there's truth to it. And one day I was listening to a podcast and this woman was talking about how she had somebody who would come into her apartment and just kind of sit in the corner when she was sleeping, which is very terrifying to think of. And it went on for months where she didn't know what to do. And then eventually they figured out that she had this issue called hypnopompic hallucinations. Eventually, for me, I was like, maybe that's what's happening. So I believed this for most of my life, that I had some sort of connection to something kind of mythological, something like that. But maybe a few years ago, I asked a psychiatrist about it, and they were like, yeah, this is totally a possibility for you. And so since then, I've kind of taken steps to try and mitigate it. Since then, I don't really get them anymore. But these hypnopompic or hypnagogic hallucinations, when other people talk about their experiences, like I'm totally open to the idea. But for me, it was an interesting journey to kind of figure out what I felt about my experiences and how to kind of reduce those, because they would happen kind of frequently compared to sort of how I would see it spoken about, especially because I think like people get sleep paralysis, and I don't know if this is...
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, I don't know if this is super common, but I would get it a lot, like at least like once every few months, and it was like extremely just, it really messed up my sleep, which makes sense. So when I was a kid, I would get it all the time, and then I was still getting it into my adulthood. I'm not sure if I feel like it's more common than people think it is, but I know that for me it was like very frequent from the kinds of things I would see people talk about online. So that's kind of my journey through figuring out sort of how my perception of kind of ghostly figures has sort of influenced me throughout my life. And this isn't to say that I dismiss anybody else's experiences, because you never know, like what other people experience could be have entirely different reasons for what they are seeing, or just their experiences, their perceptions. I just know for me, I've found a way to kind of reduce the amount of these spooky things that have happened for me throughout my life.
That is really interesting. I have heard of those types of hallucinations before. I mean, I've heard a lot of people on also kind of both sides of like they believe that what they're seeing is some kind of supernatural event versus they think that it is just their biology, it's their psychology. And I think both concepts are incredibly interesting to me, again, because I believe we are storytelling animals. We, especially, we even make stories in our dreams or when we're half asleep. Our brain does not turn off stories for us. And that is very interesting to me. I treat it personally a way in which I provide meaning in my life and also how I kind of interact with the world. And I feel like the more we understand about ourselves, and I would assume you've seen this too, it influences how we tell stories too.
Yeah. What people's kind of perceptions and understandings of their experiences are. It's not like I always try to keep an open mind, because I don't know like how they've experienced these things. And I think hearing from other people and how those things affect them, how hearing kind of their own sort of perception of these things, I'm going to say perception a lot. It's very, I think it creates a lot of empathy just in general to keep an open mind. And with something like this, it's like both sides are fascinating. And I just kind of want to hear all of it, especially as a horror writer and somebody who likes to go into psychological horror. Like it's something that I'm totally excited about talking about.
And it's ripe for playing around with
absolutely.
That line too. So now comes like the big question, which is, why do you tell stories?
Probably, I'd say to be heard, just because throughout my life, it's kind of been hard to have my voice sort of just heard over all of the noise. I love hearing from other people, but it's easy, especially I have a lot of trauma in my life, and I feel like it feels a little like reductive or silly or something, but I do feel like it has affected my ability to speak to people about my experiences, and then also speak to them just the sort of ideas that I'm really proud of, and sort of just continue inspiring myself, because I feel like validation is really nice now that I have sort of found a community that I can actually find that in, but it's sort of a balance. I do like being heard. I don't know how to phrase it, but I do feel like a lot of my reason for writing is because I feel like voices like mine do deserve to be heard, and I feel like there isn't as much of that as I would like to hear or see or read. So I think that it's really worthwhile when you're able to speak about these experiences that other people have, that they might not feel like, well, not for speaking for other people. How do I?
What it sounds like what you're talking about, and I want to hear more, is the gaps in which we live in the world, these gaps in experiences we can only hear from the other side in order to further perceive, and using your word too, perception, to further perceive what's happening in ours. And it seems like you're trying to kind of both be heard and hear, to hear more and be heard more.
Yeah, absolutely. It's especially when you kind of go through life feeling like you haven't been able to sort of speak for yourself and like give people your ideas, or like they haven't listened. It makes you very empathetic to other people who've experienced those things, but it's hard to kind of dredge up the confidence that you need to speak about those things. So one of the things with my writing has always been like, I just feel like I haven't had anybody to listen, even though like I have friends, I have my community. With some of the things I talk about, it's easier for me to explain it through art. So it's, yeah.
So can you give me an example of something that you were able to explain through your art that you found was hard to explain in any other context?
Yeah. So some of the stuff that I'm going to talk about is definitely, because the show is about kind of trust and trauma and how those things interact with each other, like for better or for worse. So I have a section where I kind of delve into something that sounds very frightening, and it's a little bit of a metaphor or an allegory. It's something that seems very horror derived from horror. I don't know. One of those will sound right. I started writing it after I had listened to an audio drama that actually made me cry, because it was about parents and this relationship between a woman and her mother, and it was really hard to listen to, because I was like, at the end I was like, oh, I should have read the content warnings. But because of that, I ended up processing. My dad had a heart attack last year. He's fine. I don't know how to phrase it.
I'm glad to hear that. But that's hard that's frightening.
Yeah.
It's frightening.
So it was kind of this sort of interwoven thing where she was talking about the character was talking about her mother and how she didn't have her around, and how she didn't have like the chance to kind of be grateful for her and apologize to her. And I was like, man, this is too relevant for me right now. I've put it on pause for like when I'm eventually able to continue, because it was really hard. But because of it, I went in and wrote a section that is kind of about like a person, without spoiling it too much. This character talks about their parental figure sort of changing, and so I went into it already feeling very like heartbroken in a way. And I started off kind of working through this small amount of grief that I hadn't touched on. Like, it was just the beginning. That's why it was a small amount. But it was this grief that I hadn't kind of opened the door to kind of actually process. And when I was going over that, I started kind of digging into some things that I knew I hadn't. I have sort of these issues with memory, which is another thing I write about very frequently. But it's kind of easy for me to put these sort of traumatic experiences I've had in the back of my head, which is how trauma generally, like a lot of people process trauma.
Right.
And I'm bipolar and I have trauma and all these various things that make it very difficult, and try to channel those into my writing. One of my parents she hasn't gotten diagnosed, but I'm very sure that she is bipolar, has bipolar.
Yeah.
And I kind of wrote a scene that seems very metaphorical in that the character experiences their parent changing over a very short period of time, and kind of talks about just the loss of feeling safe, basically. Not that it's a mix of things. Like, bipolar does not mean that somebody is going to be a bad parent or anything like that. I would assume that hopefully, if I ever wanted to have kids, that I would be a good person to care for somebody else. But for me, in my experience, which this is kind of how I do a lot of my writing, is I just channel what I know and try to be very careful about being too, like, letting anybody take it too literally.
Yeah. No, that's a really good way to put it, because that's something I also relate to in my writing, is writing from experience and trying to pulling out the emotions within the framework of metaphor or allegory, and often very painful things. And, to all this to say too, that it sounds like this particular metaphor and framework was a way in which you could explain this very difficult emotion, very complex relationship, in a way that, even if it is horror, even if it has frightening aspects to it, it's less about the frightening aspects and more about the emotional catharsis for you.
It's every time I re-listen to it, I'm like, man, I still relate to this, which it's my writing, of course I do, but it's like, I forget how many different things I put into it, because there's a lot of different aspects to trauma. And for me, that scene was about kind of realization for that character, but it was also about mourning a little bit, and at the same time sort of acceptance and forgiveness, because having a parent that struggles with mental health it's very different for everyone, and it's something that it took me a long time to kind of get to the point where I have the feelings that I do, and everybody's they have their own nuanced experiences, and I feel like I still kind of am working through it, which means it's going to be in the show.
Yeah. What is it? Like, one of the things that I've experienced actually in my writing, and also I feel like this happens just in life, that even if you have that catharsis, life is like a spiral. You kind of you go to a deeper eventually you circle back around to it and get at it from a deeper level. So that's what I'm hearing. That's what I'm hearing, at least. And to get to this idea too of being able to have the confidence to be able to reach into those places, to be able to even use an allegory, even though you can't say it with words exactly and transmit it exactly, this scene one for one, and try to explain what your experience was like. You can use this allegory to feel heard. Where did you learn that, do you feel? Where did you learn how to do that? And how did you did you have a mentor? Was it with your writing group? Like, what are ways in which helped you become a better storyteller, more confident storyteller?
This is a really good question, because I have no idea. It's probably like consuming other media and being like, wow, I see things in this, I see myself in this, and things that I've experienced in this, even though they're not saying this exact thing. They're not like being outright with the actual meaning of their stories. And maybe they didn't intend to. Sometimes that's great stories that you can relate to aren't necessarily written for that purpose of like being a catharsis for the creator, but you can find like your own meaning in things that media that you consume. So I feel like it happens naturally. I don't know that it happens naturally. Like I would assume I'm going to repeat myself. I feel like it is something that everybody kind of learns how to do. And for me, I was not somebody who wrote very much in school. I took a long time to actually make my way to writing like actual stories. I would spend time when I was a kid kind of imagining things. I was very kind of lost in my own world all the time. Big daydreamer. And it's kind of a problem because I listen to music and I'm like, oh God, I can't listen to this playlist or I'm going to get distracted. But it took me a really long time till I got to the point where I was like, okay, I need to put this down. I want people to read it, but I don't know if I'm ever going to like be confident enough for that. I have kind of a weird history when it comes to writing, but it might not be very uncommon. Who's to say?
What was one of the surprising lessons that you got in making that jump to, you know, someone who didn't write a lot to now you are here?
Yeah.
What has been a surprising lesson that you've learned over this journey so far?
So I've gone through this phase twice because I started writing, like I wrote a novel, God, like in my 20s, and I kind of, like the best thing that came out of that was having community that kind of helped me develop my confidence. And then sort of I stopped writing for a very long time. And most recently with the show, I feel like I found community again. And that's kind of revived my confidence. I didn't realize that I was perfectionist until I started this show, which is... I know that this has been discussed before, but like every time I hear another creator talk about perfectionism, I'm like, damn, we can't escape it.
Right. We can't. No, we can't. Oh, no, that's so real though. So it's interesting that, you know, what have you gotten any feedback from your community that has helped address the perfectionism issue?
Absolutely.
And what has that advice and feedback been that helps break that for you?
I've gotten a lot of feedback about this. I have 8 episodes up, but over the course of, it's been a while. I've been releasing since June last year, and I've re-recorded episodes and spent very, very much time sort of refining each episode. And it's gotten to the point where I will stream in my Discord channel and my community, like my friends within the audio drama community will come and they'll be like, you need to stop. Like, have you had your water? Have you gotten up and walked around? When did you start like working today? And I'm like, I've had a full like 48 ounces of water. And then they're like, no, you haven't. Like, go get a drink right now. So it's very like consuming, especially when you have this perfectionism kind of becoming this obsessive thing. It's easy to get to a point where it's very unhealthy. And sometimes like I didn't realize how much of a kick in the butt I needed to just like chill out and like be okay with like with just giving myself room to breathe, and that not like I'll get there basically. Like it's like I do like the idea that it's okay to kind of put out what you have. One thing that I've kind of learned over this is you can only get to a level of perfection equivalent to the skill that you have at that moment. So you're not going to be able to make like the most perfect, amazing thing that you're going to love in like a year. Like a year from now, you're going to have learned things that make you look back and maybe you're like, oh, I would have done that differently. So you can only push yourself gently, hopefully, toward using the skills that you have and what you're proud of to the level that's healthy for you to actually get that, be comfortable to put a piece of art out, any kind of media.
That's really thank you. I needed to hear that too.
Oh, I have to keep telling myself.
Yeah, well, that and the drinking water thing, that's a thing for years. I was like on Twitter, I literally put in my bio, tell me to drink water. And every once in a while, it'll be like a random tweet that I would put out completely separate, not talking about drinking water or self-care or anything. And some random smartass would just comment underneath, "Have you drunk water today, Lisette?" And like, fuck you. But also, thank you. You're right. I have not.
Yeah, I feel like I have kind of a closer-knit group within my server that we have like the things that we know the other people need to be doing. So it's like, I think everybody kind of, especially creatives, like they need to be told sometimes to like go like get some fresh air. I'm not gonna do that, but you please do that. please go get it.
Do as I say, not as I do.
Exactly. Like I feel like I am huge on hyping people up to take care of themselves and just hyping them up in general, but I reserve that for them when like I should save a little bit of that for me, but it's okay. We're all hyping each other up and like telling each other to take care of ourselves, so it works out.
I think and I do believe this, that even I know there's a one of the truisms that you can't love unless you love yourself. I think actually I don't quite believe that, because I think in some ways when you genuinely care about other people and you practice using the types of language and empathy to other people, it does reverberate back to you. You start to hear that positive self-enforcement echoed around, right? So you start to, even if you have a difficult time consuming those messages yourself, it starts to absorb. It's like a pathway to start to do that. And that's why I think about stories. Stories help prime the pump of the type of world, the type of messages, themes, whatever we want to work on. And so my next question is actually related to this, and it's about what you are seeing in the culture around you regarding storytelling that you don't think people are talking about enough, and that you particularly want to do something about.
Ooh, that's hard. So something that I really love, so this is kind of a reversal of this, is there's this thing called Audio Drama Lab, and one thing that I find with shows, so in the past, it's been a while since I've come across this. In the past, I've seen shows that they go on hiatus and they just kind of fade away. And that's something that I was very afraid of in the start. There is this quote that kind of makes me laugh in sort of a not morbid way, but it's that like once you're past your third episode, you've made it to the point where you don't feel like quitting, but then it's like every episode after that is still like you're like, am I going to make it through this one? But I do feel like everyone in the audio drama community knows that this is a thing, but it's a hard thing to broach. I don't know how I would even like approach that topic. And
no, that's a really interesting topic. No, I want to hear more. This is something I have also observed, but I also haven't heard people talk about. So tell me more. What are your thoughts around like why do you think this is a thing, especially with the audio drama community?
It's so difficult to continue pushing yourself, especially if you don't end up finding community. Like it's hard to be super active on social media, especially if you're not somebody who goes into the community having already been in the sort of circle of any kind of social media. I was not a big social media user when I joined, but I can see how it would be very difficult, and I experienced this myself, so I'm talking like I haven't, but I have experienced that. Yeah. If you feel very alone and you feel like you're creating this art, even if you're making it because you love it, some people, that's not enough, and that's okay. Like, I have felt that. I feel that way. And it's hard to kind of get past that hurdle when you know, like, every episode you put out, especially if you're, like, looking at the numbers of, like, listeners and looking at, like, oh, how many interactions have I gotten this week or something like that. There was a point where I was like, I can't do this. I can't look at this anymore because I'm going to stop, like, making my show. And it got really bad in October, which is surprising because I did a collaboration with a lot of other audio drama creators called Kill FM, and the second one actually came out very recently. But I was very excited to do it. But throughout October, I was just like, man, I don't know if I can keep doing collaborations like this. And at the end of October, I was telling one of my friends, I was like, I don't even know if I want to keep making this show. And I was only on episode like 5. It's been a while, so it's just hard to remember. Yeah. But I was also in Phonic Fiction Fest, so there were only like 3 things I was working on in October, but they felt like
that's a lot of things. I'm not gonna lie, that's a lot of things,
especially to someone who's like super new to the community. So I got to a point where I was like, I don't know if I can do this. Like, it was to the point where I sent the voice actors on the show messages, and I was like, I really appreciate you being on the show. I would understand if you're not super comfortable continuing on with the show. I don't know how long this is going to be. And it was like how long it was going to continue. I didn't know if it would go past season 1. I wasn't sure like how long I'd be creating. And it feels very different from other times. Like, I stopped writing my novel. Like, I finished my novel that I wrote in like 2017, and I didn't write again for like 5 years, which is when I started the show. But one of the things there's a lot of things I've gained from continuing on. The other day, I was looking at the Discord, and I have a message pinned where I was like, I don't know how long the show is going to go on for. And this was back in October. And since then, I've kind of found the confidence again to just make whatever I want. Like, nobody's holding me to anything. Like, at least for now, I'm just like smooth sailing. I can do whatever I want. And that's going to be true like the whole time. Just make what you want. But it's hard to get through those points where you're very sort of where you feel like you can't continue, and you kind of want to just like let your show fade or let your art kind of just drift away and like not worry about it. But since October, I've put out and worked on things that I'm extremely happy about, extremely excited about, and like I love learning. And just having something that kind of gives me that push to continue learning that's worked out for me. It's not something that is easy for everyone to do, and for some people it's like super easy. Like they just want to learn a thing. I don't know. I'm sure people exist that have those feelings, and I'm very jealous. Seeing shows that have gone on hiatus and not come back is really heartbreaking, but at the same time, like, if that's what they needed, then that's what they needed.
Yeah, so I kind of want to go down this rabbit hole a little bit, because this is something that's really that I also wrestle with. And I say this having been in a point of privilege where I was able to finish my show. I did only 3 seasons, but I did finish a show. And I have not seen a lot of audio drama folks who have had series finales, like actually planned out series finales. And it's interesting to me. And I'm curious if you think is there something specific about audio, or is this just another challenge for any artist to let go of their art if they feel like it's no longer serving them or storyline? Is this just kind of part of the ecosystem, part of the journey or educate or the learning, as you put it? What do you think is the nature of this?
I think it is
of this phenomenon.
I think it's very difficult to create something and then be like, okay, I'm going to stop this eventually. Like, I'm going to tie this up, especially because creators just they create. Like they get inspired by stuff and they're like, oh, I can work this into this thing that I'm making. And it's hard to kind of be like, oh, this is my child. This is my child, and I want to continue taking care of it and letting it grow, and like, when it's okay, I'm sure, I don't know this, it's okay to just let your audio drama, let your creative endeavor go and live its life and like gain listeners or people who want to experience your art and not kind of baby it. But that's something I struggle with for sure. Like every kind of thing that I go into, I'm not somebody who can write short stories. I try to, but then I'm like, I get going and I'm like, oh, but what if I made another chapter of this? And it's something that I don't want to do with the thing that I'm creating right now, but it is very tempting because you fall in love with the world, you fall in love with your characters, and you want to keep those alive and keep those going and changing and sort of exploring all the different things that can come out of a specific project. But
right.
It's something that I think it gets very tiring for people consuming something if it goes past the point where it makes sense. It's like there is a point where, what is it, jumping the shark? There's a point where you have to kind of figure out where it's an appropriate place to be like, okay, we're getting near the end. And for me, that is very difficult. Like I've thought about the end of this show. Like I know what needs to happen by the end of it, but it's like I've talked with people about, oh, a lot of shows do 5 seasons. Like, why doesn't anybody do 3 seasons? And there have been some recent shows that have ended on 3 seasons. And I think about it and I'm like, man, I don't... 3 seasons, like, that makes me so... Like, I'm preemptively mourning the series when, like, I'm not even through the first season, but I'm like, I don't want to let it go. But it's like, I know, like, I don't want to get to the point where it's tedious to listen to.
No, well, as someone who has done 3 seasons, 3 seasons show, I'm always happy to tell you about my experience. But it's something that happened at the end of Kalila, and it was a while after, where I truly felt like I had a grief. Mm-hmm. Like it was like the way that you use the term, like a child, it feels like an empty nest.
Yeah.
Right? Like that's, and you know, I don't want to have biological children, but like that I think is the closest that, like, it was hard. And I think that whether or not it's a story that you started that only has a couple episodes that you decide to let go of, or 4 or 5 seasons, or 7 seasons, or 15 seasons. Thank you, Supernatural. Get me started. I will get started on that. Jumping the shark, right? But yeah, it's really difficult. And I think, you know, to your point around like the question of where this is going to end, and looking at and kind of the responsibility of the creator to really wonder, like, when does this need to end, or what needs to happen? What do you think makes you feel like you've done your job as a storyteller?
So something that I'm trying to focus more on, especially as I come near to the end of the season and think about the second season, is I want people to really connect with the characters. And everybody has their strengths and things that they need to kind of, not that they need to work on them because they're like not great at them or something, but like there's always room for improvement. So what makes me feel like I've gotten something out enough to be consumable, to be proud of it, is feeling like I've answered any questions that people have and feeling like they're going to be satisfied, which is really hard to kind of predict. I don't know if it's, maybe I just don't think about, I feel like I'm a little mean sometimes to people who listen to my stories, because I'm like, I had a thing one time where I was saying, I don't spoon feed people. I just take the spoon away, and it's very mean. But I want people to feel satisfied at the end. And so if I can answer as many questions as I can and do it in a way where people feel everything coming together soon enough before the end of it, because there's a point where people are going to get very exhausted on questions that they've been waiting for. That is the thing that I worry about the most. Like, if I make something that sounds cool, if I'm satisfied with my writing, because I've been kind of lucky with this one because this was a novella first, and I had to translate it into a script, which is its own form of writing. It's something where I feel fairly happy, fairly proud of things. I have that whole curse of being a creator. Like, what are the right words? There's some kind of idiom or something that describes.
Yeah.
Yeah. But I feel like I have to get to a point where I'm trying to think of the audience, and are they going to feel like they have all the answers for the questions that have been posed throughout the series or the season? And also, have I done this well enough to make somebody cry?
Yes, that's the thing. So your metaphor brought to mind a visual for me, which is because you used the term like spoon feeding. What I got was like, instead of spoon feeding someone, you're giving them like a crawfish boil, like you right, like where they have to get their hands in and break open, like tear the head off, suck out the marrow, like they have to have the bib and the gloves.
Yeah, they have to put in.
That's a very horror oriented. They have to put in some effort, some mental effort. That's the mental thing that you got, and that's hard because the idea of creating a really good crawfish, but you need to know how to cook. You need to know how to balance flavors,
the right seasonings.
Yes, exactly. So I'm gonna wrap this up with the most important question. I say this facetiously because I've said it facetiously in all the rest of the interviews, which is the most important question, which is, considering all this, the crawfish boil that you're trying to make, why do you tell stories?
Because I'm trying not to tell a joke based off of
You could say it. Please tell me a joke. I want a joke.
I want my voice to be heard, and I want people to have a good meal, to cook some good food, cook some good stories.
I love that. I think that's a great way to end this interview. We all want a good meal. Yeah. That's exactly how I feel about storytelling. I want good meals, and just healthy, hearty, you're surrounded with other people around you, and we're all just having a great time, and we're just being fed. And that is a great metaphor for good storytelling.
Yeah, every time I listen to an episode of a show, and I have I actually am close enough with the creator to where I can make jokes with them. I'm feed me. I need the next episode. Give me some beans. Spill the beans. Feed me.
Cool. Well, thank you so much for joining me. This has been an awesome interview. I'm really glad that I have come across the Moon Crown. All of you listening should add that to your story feed. And do you want to make a recommendation of where they can find you on social media? Obviously, you have a Discord.
Oh yeah,
right. Where can people find you out in the...
mooncrown.com is the best place to find all the information because it has everything aggregated on that site.
I will make sure to link that in the show notes. All right. Unless you have anything else to add, a final sign off, I think we're good here.
Thank you so much.